I appreciate you for no other reason this. There's one other guy among Calvary's, and he pastors in Houston, that when I first went to speak for them, they called me and they said, we have an adjustable pulpit. What height would you like to have it? I said, what height is your pastor? They said, 5 feet 6 inches. I said, leave it alone. That's what I like. But some of them, what a delight to be with you guys again. I really appreciate the fact that you showed up. And for those of you who were not warned, I don't know what to say to you. People try to describe me and they can't. But I sure enjoy life, and I hope I can help you do that a bit today. Now, to get started on the nature of Jesus, the Jesus style, I have to tell you a little bit of the expectancies they had in ancient times about what the Messiah would do. Some of them you'll be a little bit shocked. I'm not going to tell you all of them. There's not time for all of them. But one of the things, ladies, they believed that when Jesus, or they didn't know what his name would be at that point, but when he came, when the Messiah came, a man's wife would have a baby every month. So the men were praying for the Messiah to come, and I think the women were saying, please, no. But things like that, that he would, of course, be a political leader, and they still, those who might expect the Messiah now in Israel, are expecting a political leader and so forth. So there were a lot of different misunderstandings about what he would be, but they had become tradition, and the Messiah then, they felt, had to fit their traditions, and he wasn't going to do that. But interesting thing happened. It was sad to begin with. For 400 years, nobody had heard from God. It was miserable. I wonder if they got up every morning and said, did you hear from God? No, me either. So when you don't hear from God, you hang on to whatever you do have, and you find the birth of traditions. But then this changed. Now, I'm going to do a lot of narrating of the scripture tonight, and just cut me some slack if you will. And I need to warn you that what I love to do is to get in the Bible and be a character and think things through, what probably would have, maybe could have, and I'm going to have the liberty to say they did. But the Levites were the official people who took care of the temple and so forth. You had to have Levi genes or you were not eligible to take. I know, it's not going to get better. And that was a family. But there were too many of them. I mean, to have that whole family. So they broke them up into month-long sections of taking care of the temple. There were still too many of them in each of those sections. So that presents an interesting possibility that one could live all of his life as a Levite and never have anything to do. He comes, walks around, tries to look spiritual maybe, whatever that is. I haven't achieved it yet. And I think maybe the character that opens this might have been like that. And now he comes to his great age. We're not sure exactly what it was, but it was great. And he won the lottery. Oh, he drew the straw that finally he got something to do to put the incense on the altar. I can see him as he makes his way in there. Oh man, this is wonderful. Finally I have something to do. Poof! An angel. He was terrified. Oh man, the first time I get to do something, they scare me to death. And the first words that closed that 400-year-old period and opened the New Testament, the first words God spoke in the New Testament to begin it, was, fear not. Don't be afraid. Now, interesting thing about fear, my guess is that if you're like me, you struggle with some fears, you know. And you got to remember that God is not the author of fear. Fear has torment, and He doesn't want you to be afraid. Now, I know He doesn't want you to stick your finger in a light socket. You can be afraid of that. But He doesn't want you to have the kind of fears that guide your life. It's just not what He has designed. And so He starts the whole New Testament with the words, don't be afraid, fear not. And then, I love what happens here. This guy and his wife happen to not have any children. Now, you know, in our culture, there's if no big deal unless you wanted them, you know, and I'm sure from what I understand in my early childhood, I could have belonged to someone else pretty easily. Here. But they believed that not having any children was a curse from God. That was just a belief they had. It wasn't the way God operated. But this guy, old and inactive, but righteous, had no children. Which meant he would never have been considered for anything important, simply because he had no children. And so here he is. At least I get to do one thing. And he goes in and he puts that there, and the angel appears, says, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. I have good news for you. Your prayer has been answered. You're going to have a baby. Sir, that's an old prayer. I haven't prayed that prayer in years. You think I'm old, you ought to see my wife, you know. Well, now, you got to see this. I have fun thinking about this. The angel said to him, well, since you didn't believe me, you are going to have a child. You got to name him John. But because you didn't believe me, you're not going to be able to speak until he's born. Now, folks, he got to go home to Elizabeth. Talk to me. You never talk to me. So I can see him writing it down, and she looks at it and says, get away from me, you old fool. I mean, what do you think had happened? If I were him and I couldn't speak, I know what my wife would have done. My husband has gone crazy. Get me out of here. But sure enough, Elizabeth is now pregnant in her great age. This is amazing, folks. You know what? I think that if it had happened today, people would have been saying to her, you need to get an abortion. You know? I mean, you're too old for this. You know? And so, sure enough, she's now pregnant. And of course, the news gets out. I think when Zechariah, her husband, went back to the temple, the guys were all giving him high fives. Man, we had no idea. It was still. Now, one of the things that the angel said to him about John is that he would be a joy and a delight to you. I've thought about that. I don't know. Have you ever thought about what it meant to raise John the Baptist? I can see Zechariah coming home. Elizabeth saying, you need to talk to your boy. I caught him eating locusts again, you know. Although locusts are kosher food, really. So, folks, someday we might have to eat insects. And they'd be kosher. The locusts and grasshoppers will be. It's okay. You can practice anytime you can get it. But I think about the fact that now he was aware that his son was going to be announcing the Messiah. just looking at him and thinking what was going to happen, the angel said, he will be a joy and a delight. Now, for the beginning of this, I want you to participate with me because this word's going to occur again in several instances. And so, you know, I do things like this. So I'm going to, in various places, say joy like that. And it won't be a shock to you. You'll know it's coming. But I want you to do it too. So when I do that and you see me getting ready, I want you to be prepared to raise your hands and yell joy. Let's practice right now. We've got to make sure we can do it. Yeah, if you got anything in your hands, I don't want to fling it. So let's try it. Joy! You know what came to my mind when you put that down? Forgive me, you just got to hear this. Ladies, you might remember way back in the 50s, 60s of a different century. Hats were in, especially wide brim hats. And I was at a conference of church, several churches, and the auditorium was angled. And a lady near the back in one of these wide brim hats sneezed. Oh, shoo! And that hat flew off and came down and curved around here and went back up the other side. The service was over. So forgive me, but it's your fault. You made me think about it. So.
What a big hat. What reminds you about the big hat?
Well, and when I told him not to throw it off, I get ideas from things. Don't worry about it. Now, that's like my wife. She's going to make. Now, how did that give you an idea like that? And my grandma, I couldn't tell her a joke. She'd say, why did they say that? I loved her. She was my cookie person. You know, if I licked my lips, she'd bake me a chocolate cake. But I'm getting off. Forgive me. Look, I'm old. I have memories. Well, the angel's not through. He's got another visit to make. And he goes to what most scholars think was about a 15-year-old girl. He's an extremist, man. Real old, real young. Now, back in that day, folks, this is hard for us to understand. 15 might have been right on the edge of being an old maid, you know. Unmarried and still 15? Where I lived in Mississippi at one time, I had schoolmates got married when they were 12. I know. Yeah. In fact, the guy that rescued us, a guy from hunger, a real hillbilly up on Choctaw Ridge named Mode Corder. He was 72, had married Mary, his wife, when she was 12. And he was illiterate, couldn't read or write. He said, I only went to school 2 days in my life. First day I learned how to fight. Second day I learned how to court. Said I had everything I needed to know. Anyway, why did I get off on that? So this angel appears to Mary. And guess what he says to her? Don't be afraid. Fear not. You know, I think that there's something about being around Jesus, you know, as part of what's happening with him, that is supposed to take fear away from us, because there's something going on so much in our favor that we ought to be able to go, you know. Now, that doesn't mean if you see a 10-ton truck barreling down on you that you shouldn't get out of the way. But you know what I'm talking about, those fears, those things that guide us. And I know that along with having a broken heart, every pew tends to have one, you know. But we internalize them. We don't tell anybody, you know, I'm terrified by this. Can you pray for me? This is what our home fellowships are all about, and the relationship. If you're carrying a fear, you should not carry it alone. God wants you to be free from it. And so Mary, now with the news that she's going to be bearing the actual Messiah. Can you imagine that? A 15-year-old is the mother of God. You know, I have 3 daughters. At 15, no. But isn't it interesting that God went to such great extremes, to the old and to the young? What about those of us in the middle? Well, maybe he thought about us, but we were busy. You know. And so he goes to those two. Mary rushes, I assume she rushed. She goes over to where Elizabeth, her cousin, was, who she knew was expecting John the Baptist. And when the sound of her voice reached Elizabeth, John leaped in her womb, and he leaped for joy. Yeah, you're running a little late over here. I wonder how they knew. How did she know that he leaped for joy? My wife and I have had 4 children, and they all moved a lot. I think they wanted out. But we could tell what she had eaten. If she ate a pizza, there was a pizza move in there. If she ate barbecue, there was a barbecue move, you know. But wouldn't it be great to be able to know this was joy, man? This was a joy move. Now, just a few months later, we find a group of shepherds, probably not more than 6. I've kind of looked into this, and the way they protect their sheep and the amount of sheep they would likely have to get together, it couldn't have been more than 6, or it would have been unwieldy. And so they're there in the middle of the night, protecting their sheep. Probably not a lot of incandescent lights around. I don't know what they were doing to keep them down, maybe singing country western songs or something like that. And suddenly, there was this big group of angels in the sky. And what were their first words? Fear not. You see, there's something about what Jesus is and is going to represent in our lives that should deliver us from fear, man. We've got it made, you know. And he said, don't be afraid. We bring you good news of great joy, which shall be to a few special people that we like. No. You know, I'm not a Calvinist. I have some dear Calvinist friends. But they know I disagree with them on that point, because Calvinism believes that only a few will be saved, and they're predestined to be saved, and everybody else tough, you know. Well, I can't go with that, first of all, because of what the angel said. Good news which shall be to a certain percentage of people? To all people. Now, that would be mean of God to give everybody good news, but then sorry, you know. And the Bible tells us that God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to the knowledge of the Lord. But also, when Jesus gave us our signature verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the state of Washington. No, God so loved the world. I have to believe that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Man, this is a great, and nothing for us to be afraid of. And so they say that to the shepherds, which was a bad thing, because they were the wrong ones to say it to. You know how, oh man, we're in the middle. It seems like I'm always in the middle of a campaign, you know. And with all of the things that are going on, and the advertising and the places they want to get it into this system and that system, because they can send it to all of you. And I get about 200 junk emails a day. You know, I'm not going after a record. I'm just complaining. But you see, it's like saying there were 6 homeless, unknown guys gathered together in the night. You're going to depend on them to advertise something? And the angels appear to them. See, folks, we have sanitized shepherds, because we say, well, Jesus was a shepherd, you know, and oh yeah, shepherd. Jesus called himself the good shepherd. Not shepherd, the good shepherd, which was an oxymoron. And I've told you this many times before. An oxymoron is mutually exclusive terms like government organization or family vacation or Microsoft Works, things like that. So these guys were shepherds, wrong ones to bring the message to, but we learned something about Jesus right here. Had the announcement come to someone higher, if the first announcement had come to anybody higher, the shepherds would have known it's not for us. He had to come to those shepherds. So that even a shepherd, he was showing it just how wide his arms were. And if Jesus operated like us, we would be wanting to separate people. Okay, this guy's not going to help us. We got to, you're okay. You're wearing suspenders. We want you, and you'll do too. But no, which will be to all people. Now, I got to rush along here because I'm just sort of building up to something. We're not sure exactly how long. A couple of years, most people think, maybe from 18 months to 30 months after Jesus was born, some wise men show up from the east. Now, you have to recognize that the description is such that they would have been dressed for the occasion. I mean, they didn't wear clothes like I did. You look at them and go, wow, they're important. Now, unfortunately, we have messed with them a bit. We sing a song, "We Three Kings of Orient are." Two mistakes right at the beginning. We don't know it was three. There were three gifts, but trust me, it would have probably taken more than three guys to afford to pull those gifts together. And we three kings, they weren't kings. They were wise men. And they show up, hey, can somebody tell me where's the King of the Jews going to be born? We've come to worship him. Where is he? Now, one thing I have learned in my life is that if there is a king, they don't want to hear about another king being born. And Herod was that way. Herod, they said it was safer to be his pigs than his sons, because he'd killed all of them because he thought they were scheming to take over, So he'd killed them. And of course, Herod they brought the guys to Herod. He said, tell me the story. And they didn't. And said, when did you see the star? And he said, okay, I tell you what, I've checked with the priests, and they tell me that it's just down the road in Bethlehem. You're in luck. Go for it, man. Now, something happens as they get near to Jesus. The star reappears. Now, folks, if you ever go to a planetarium, they'll try to put they can do it with the computers, put the heavens in reverse and go back to there. See that configuration of stars? There's the Star of Bethlehem. No, it isn't. This star was different. It was especially created. It moved and it blinked. It would go on and off. And it could point. And when that star reappeared and pointed to where Jesus was, the Bible says the most interesting thing. My mind plays with this. I love this. First, I need to tell you that the word joy is inadequate. It's our English construction, and it does not convey what was being said about that we then translate as joy. It was very physical. In fact, during the Jesus movement, one of the young ladies wrote a song about it and said, I'm going to jump down, turn around, touch the ground and praise the Lord, So it was a very active thing, You'd whirl around and enjoy it, jump up and down, and touch the ground. I think I'll stay here for a little while. And we then take that into a little three-letter word, joy. But I'm telling you that because the words that describes these wise men, when they saw the star again, pointing it out, it says they were filled with exceeding joy. That meant that they were doing cartwheels too, maybe, and doing some extra shouting, and it sounded like a football game going on or whatever. Why? They were about to see Jesus. Isn't that something? What is it about him that brings joy to us? Well, we know one thing, The words that introduce him are don't be afraid. Man. Now, this was important to me because I have to be honest with you, when I began to really see the nature of Jesus, I was a little bit afraid because I knew that nothing ground against the nature of Gayle Erwin, and it was so like, oh no! More than this. And I was afraid that if I really followed the nature of Jesus, I'd never be president. Now I'm so glad. My mama thought I would be. She said, at least it'll get you out of the house. And the ambitions that I had, and God's had to deal with those with me, I'd have to give them up. Now, this can stagger you when you really first look at it. But here were guys who had nothing and guys who had everything, and both of them are deliriously happy and joyful because of Jesus. Well, you come down the road ways, and Jesus sends his guys out 2 by 2 to do what he does, which would bring a lot of joy. Just think of it. I want you to go out there. I want you to heal the sick. I want you to cast out demons. I want you to raise people from the dead. Do what I've been doing. Now, that would probably cause people to say, whoa, I was sick until now. This is incredible. And the apostles came back, well, it was more than the apostles, but they came back full of joy. And it tells us why. Because even the demons were subject to them. Amazing. And then Jesus says the strangest thing. Don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you. What? I figure, they fought with each other all the time. I figure on the way home, they argued over who cast the most demons out. One of them probably said, well, I still got mine. It looks like a frog. I pickled him here. And Jesus says, no, don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you. Oh, listen, folks, if I were to cast out demons like those guys were doing, and as Jesus empowered them, you know what I would want to do? I would want to start an organization with a magazine, my picture 5 times a page, and an offering envelope in the middle. But Jesus says, don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you. So then, all right, what are we supposed to rejoice about? Rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Wow. So the things I see tend to be the ones that bring me the most joy, But what Jesus is saying is when you realize and understand that your name is written in heaven, that's when you're to be filled with joy. That can go on and on and on and on and on, You might not cast demons out every day, but you can have the joy of being saved constantly, Well, now I got to move on, and I'll just mention one thing, and this is going to get me really into the nature of Jesus. In John chapter 13, he says to the apostles, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Now, I am going to take a position now, and I'll prove it before our days are over. That wasn't just a new commandment, it was the new commandment to fulfill and, in a sense, replace all other commandments. To love one another. But then he said, as I have loved you. Now, there's the problem. When I first read that, I thought, I got to get crucified. It didn't turn me on. But I realized, no, he's talking past tense. As I have loved you. Well, how had he loved you? Well, thanks for asking. He did the lowest servant job at that table. He washed feet. We don't understand that anymore because it's not part of our greeting rituals. If I were to come to your house and knock on your door, I hope you would greet me and say, Gayle, good to see you. Maybe embrace me, come in, have a seat. Let me get you a cup of Christian coffee. I come to Washington, it's a big crack house. That's what it is. Every block. And those, have a seat, let me get you a cup of coffee. Those are the simplest greeting rituals in the world. Americans, you know, we just don't waste time with other kinds of greeting rituals. And they're very simple, but if this were 2,000 years ago, and I knocked on your door, I hope you would, Gayle, good to see you, kiss me on both cheeks. They still do that in some places. You would seat me, and if I were especially welcomed, you'd anoint my head with oil. Now, we do when we pray for the sick. We've got a little bottle of oil, you know, it's olive oil. And toot, toot, toot. That's okay, but that's not the way they did it back then. They'd take that bottle of olive oil and empty it on your head and slick it down. Yuck. But that was a very soothing, cleansing, honoring, and even healing thing. And there's an advantage. If I were to leave your house today, being especially welcome, nobody would know. But back then, everybody would know. Somebody loves that dude. Look at that greasy head. See? Well, Jesus proved his love not by lining them up. I don't find anywhere that happened and saying, okay, James, I love you. John, I love you. Bartholomew, I love you. Peter, I'm struggling a bit, but I'll get there. Judas, I'm thinking, you know. No, he apparently never said that. Now, you know, in our culture, my wife likes to hear me say that every day. I mean, every day. She's not happy with, I told you 57 years ago when we got married. If it changes, I'll let you know. No, we have a need to hear that, don't we, ladies? And that's okay, but that's not the best way to know when someone loves you. It's because they tell you that. Jesus showed basic nature right there when he got up from that table and did the lowest slave job. And he says, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. Well, the Bible says that he then showed them just how much he loved them, or loved them at the end. It's an old idiom that says the full extent of his love. Wow. The slave job, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the creator of the universe, washed their feet. Now, what's the big deal about that? Here's the big deal. They believed back then, as Muslims and Arabs still do today, that the bottom of the foot was the dirtiest part of the body. And so it would be the lowest ranked slave to wash feet. Oh, man. But if you were too poor to have servants, the host would wash feet. You would wash feet, my feet. But it would be a public admission of your low estate. And with this, Jesus, it wasn't the opening volley, but it was a significant volley. It's something that I cannot escape. I don't want to escape. I want to understand what it means. You know, I've been a pastor. Nobody will have me now, but because I'm gone all the time, you know. And before I understood this, you know, I realized I got to do something about this foot washing thing. So I first thought my job was to point out dirty feet. You've got dirty feet. You've got dirty feet. You know. And I realized they already know that. I didn't have to announce that to them. And that didn't help them. And I progressed to thinking that maybe I was in charge of a giant high-pressure fire hose to wash their feet. But I discovered I was knocking their feet off their legs, and they were going home crippled. And finally God got to me, and he said, Gayle, if you're going to wash feet, you have to get close enough to people to touch them. Now, one of the things, and folks, this is very important for our culture, very important. Love is here defined by Jesus as an act of servanthood, of saying, I'm going to do something to make your life better. I'm going to treat you in a way that will enhance and improve and bless you. Now, you know as well as I do that we have this Oh, I have this charmy feeling, for so-and-so. Oh, man, somebody help me. Am I in love, But if it's not them, at least could you get me some ice cream? I have the same feeling for it. But when you're serving somebody, it doesn't always feel good. I've had people ask me, can you love someone and not like them? Well, like is an emotion. And it's not bad, it just isn't trustworthy. It comes and it goes. I have to confess to you that in spite of what you think of me, I'm not always nice. And that's one reason I don't have a gun at my house. And if I did, I would not let my wife know where it was. And emotions are so fickle. If you've been married more than 30 minutes, you've got issues already. So sometimes our emotions and our servant actions walk together, but not always. Sometimes, oh man. But you see, the emotion will make you quit loving, whereas the love of God makes you keep serving. I got to tell you, sir, I don't know if I've told you this story, but I got just the best illustration of this as far as marriage is concerned. I'm an old Oklahoma farm boy. I was born on my grandfather's farm, kicked off of it at the age of 3 months. My father was born on the same farm, delivered by the same doctor, actually. But in that area, church was 15 miles away on a dirt road, a bridge to go over that often got washed out. So church was precious, man, to get to go. But there was a guy in that neighborhood. I knew him personally. He was mean, man. He hated the church. Never been there, but he hated it. He hated God. Problem is, he had a wife who just loved God with all of her heart. He said, you can go to church once a week, and that's it. You can't take anything, can't take any gifts. And if he saw her car headed toward the church, he'd jump in his pickup, chase her down, stop her, and search the car to make sure she wasn't taking food or clothes or some other gift to the church. Really nice guy. I knew him. And then when God sent me and my wife out on our journey, I had been called to preach while I was in college, majoring in chemistry, planning until God called me to be a surgeon, a brain surgeon. Be thankful. And God interrupted that. I will tell you this, and this is true. He spoke to my heart and he said, Gayle, I like doctors and I'll bless you if you become one. But you will always be operating on unconscious people. And you can't change your world that way. If you want to change the world, you're going to have to preach. So that was it. But I still sometimes operate on unconscious people. I see when eyes begin to go to half-mast and so on. Why did I tell you that? So love is a thing that we do for other people. Love is a recognition that that other person is deeply loved by God. And if he is as crazy about you as he indicates, I'd better treat you good. If your soul and all your being is as valuable to him as it is, as he says it is, I cannot divide you up into, well, now they're not our kind of people and we don't want to have anything with them. They're Samaritans or something. And, no, we're this and they're that. No. Even the least God is crazy about. And as sophisticated as we are, we're not one bit better in God's love than the homeless guy on the corner, or the person who's not of our race or our niceness or whatever. When I realized that, that changed me. That changed me. I was a Mississippi boy. See, my dad moved with my mom to Mississippi to start a church, and I don't have to tell you what Mississippi was like back then. Still is. Still is. I go down there and I'm chafed inside because of what God's done to me. And I see people that, man, I love you. How can I serve you? How can I make life better for you? Well, that was what Jesus was teaching. And he says, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. In fact, this is the way people will know you belong to me. Oh, I thought they would know I belong to him if I just have this kind of energy and, I'm smiling and having to, wipe my lips or something because they get tired of that. And there was a period in my life when I thought that was kind of where it was at, but I don't anymore. It's okay. I mean, if you want to, I enjoy active things sometimes, but that's not the thing. The thing Jesus wants from me is to make life better for you. And that's why I preach. It's the gift God has given me, and I feel like if you really hear me, you're going to go away from here today understanding more and loving more and feeling God's love more. Well,
Gayle, what happened to the meal of God?
oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. I knew somewhere in here my mind had, thank you. That's why I'm with him some. He does that. So I graduate from college. My wife and I head out to preach now, Hey, nobody wants a kid right out of college to preach except your old home places. And so I'm conducting this series of preaching at Elm Grove Christian Fellowship, my old home church. And Wednesday night, this guy shows up. I knew him. Everybody knew him, and it's like, what is he doing here? But when I gave the invitation that night, he shot out of that, and it was like sliding into third base. He came down to the front and wept his way into the kingdom, man. Everybody was absolutely elated. So, I was only about 20, so I was kind of stupid still. And I asked him a question. I'll tell you his name now. Martin, what was it I said that really got to you? I told you a stupid question. And he said, I'll never forget this. It wasn't anything you said. I was just hoping you'd hurry up and shut up so I could get saved. I thought, we got a new method now, John. If I shut up now, how many will get saved? He said, it's my wife. I can't take this anymore. I put that woman through hell, and she puts me through heaven. The worse I get, the better she gets. I just can't take it anymore. I got to have what that woman had. Amen. The last time I saw him, he was an elder in that church. I'm thinking, you know what? Servanthood. See, the thing was, it wasn't always a pleasant thing. But she was dedicated to making life better for him because she knew God loved him. And boy, did it ever pay off. I have seen, I could spend the rest of the night giving you stories. People want to share those stories with me when serving just won the day for people. And they knew they loved me. Well, I got to quit now, but I got to take you to, one more thing. In John chapter 15, Jesus said, I tell you this, and he's talking about what he's, if you keep my commandments, and then he fine-tunes it to love the love each other, then I tell you this, that your joy may be full. How in the world can serving others give you joy? I mean, if I had to wash feet and I knew what they thought about them back then, I would not be thinking, oh, this is so much fun. Thank you. But here's a discovery, and if you haven't discovered this yet, and I'm sure you have, you guys are so far ahead of the rest of the world. When you are blessing other people, you discover that joy chases you down. You know, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They put that word in there, pursuit, because they knew happiness was an Olympic runner. And you weren't like, you're going to catch it. You might think, well, I've slowed down, I'll wait and see if he comes back around. But he ain't. No. But you can have happiness chase you when you're serving other people. I have a friend, I wish I could get him to travel with me because I'm so blessed by him in more than one way, but I would just love for you to meet him and hear his testimony. He's a retired professor from a very famous university who, and I'm going to brag a little here, wrote me not too long ago and said, I've been doing kind of an analysis of my life, of who changed me, you know. And he said, back in 1985, when you and a guy named Chuck Smith, you probably never heard of him, did a conference for Church of Christ people, of all things, in Nashville. And I heard you teach about the nature of Jesus. Now, he recently told me that he had at that time been a disciple of a woman named Ayn Rand. Evil personified. Her thing is selfishness is where it's at. You're the big guy, don't even believe in God. If you want to abort a baby, go ahead, they're weak anyway. Let the poor starve. Let the sick die. Give the strong freedom, no rules and regulations. You'd be surprised who among our politicians are still followers of her. And he just recently told me that he was had been a follower of Ayn Rand until he heard me teach on the nature of Jesus. A-Y-N-R-A-N-D. 2 words. Easy to research. I just found out, you know, Sears Roebuck has been my old standby for us. It is going under. You know why? They've adopted her system for their... And he said, when I heard you, I knew, that's it. And he, I mean, did a 180. And now he is so servant-hearted. And so much so, he came into some money. And here he has, you know, everything he wants, anything he wants. But he decides, no, I'm not going to do it that way. He looks for people who nobody else can help, who maybe are so terribly afflicted that even the state doesn't know what to do with them. And if he finds out about them, he's there. He rescued one girl. I met her. I wrote a book about her. Who had lived in, her parents had kept her in one room all of her life. Filthy. Fed her occasionally. She didn't have a language. When the state discovered her, they didn't know what to do. They had no system to deal with her. He was there. And he has provided everything that young lady needs. A teacher, that, you know, so we can't afford a teacher for her, just for her. He said, I can. And so he has done everything possible to make her life now not only comfortable, but just filled with activity and things to help her learn and gradually learn a language. But there was someone else that he was helping too in a certain state. And he said, And after he had done a really marvelous thing for her, he was a deeply afflicted person. And on his way home, as he was driving, and he stopped to spend the night, and he sent me an email. He said, told me what he had just done. He said, I feel like $1 billion. I said, you're onto something. You're onto something. You can't know this until you find out that by giving yourself away, you have found out the nature of Jesus and how it works its way out in your life, and you are absolutely filled with joy. Okay. So now I've taught you how to be happy. It isn't a new, bigger computer. It isn't a bigger car. I got to tell you that man gave me the Touareg that I have out there, the diesel Touareg. He saw what I was driving. He said, what kind of car would you like? Well, I said, it ain't this one. He said, pick out what you want and do it quick. And he paid for it, which I appreciated. Now it's giving me problems. I had trouble on the way up here. But it was minor, you know. But it's a Volkswagen diesel. I expect him to take it away from me. But joy will be when you bless. I'm going to go ahead and tell you one other thing about this. I'll probably repeat this part. And don't raise your hands, but do you ever struggle with sin? You didn't have to you raised your voices, didn't you? Here's how to live a sinless life. This is going to be so simple. When you are blessing people, you're not sinning. I marveled at the fact that when Jesus caught Peter in a lie by going back fishing, and he says, and you remember this, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Peter had problems. He really had problems. If I'd have been Jesus and Peter said, well, I like you, I would have said, you know, I can't count on you. You are so wishy-washy, you'll never be Pope. But he didn't do that. He said to him, this troubled man, if you love me, feed my sheep. Give yourself away. Bless others. Did it 3 times. I would have, by the 3rd time, said, does it mean anything to you that I've said 3 times, do you love me? Remember something you did 3 times recently? Does the word deny mean anything to you? He didn't do that. Jesus knew that the cure of all your psychological problems is not delving into your innards. When you delve into your innards, let's go back and see if we can relive. That's where you'll stay the rest of your life. Because once you get one room cleaned up, you discover, ooh, what's this smell? Oh, it's the next room. And you never make it. But when you bless other people, healing happens in the most incredible way. Okay, now I'm supposed to have already quit. But is it okay if I want... Yeah, he's getting up like he's wanting me to quit.
You're good. You're fine.
Okay, I got to do one more thing. I want to... Would you like to know something about end times? Well, here is Gayle Erwin's end time sermon. It's quick, 1 verse. You go to the 1st chapter of Revelation and turn left. And go 2 verses back in that little tiny 1-chapter book of Jude, where it says, now unto him, Jesus, who is able to keep you from falling. You thought it was up to you. And present you faultless. Really? Before the presence of his glory. Now, I got to stop right here because I want you to build this in your mind. Let's say, and it might be this gathering of all of humanity that has made it. And Jesus is presenting us one at a time to the Father, where everybody else can see and hear. Now, this is Jesus doing this for you and 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 you. It's not like Oh, well, I might not be there. You know, no, 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 no. This is your show. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling and present you faultless before the presence of his glory, this would be his Father, with exceeding joy. Can you see, a lot of times, if you ever see people putting movies together about Jesus, he's always dignified, walking up. But he ain't dignified. No. When he presents you, I can see it. And now, Dad, here's Johnson A. Woo! And here is Pat Lynn. And here's Gayle Erwin. Look, I did the best I could, Dad. But this is how he values you. This is what he does for you. And it's just totally in keeping with who he is. I don't know, were you ever at one of the pastors' conferences at Costa Mesa? When we would eat, Chuck Smith would have his table over on the side, and I knew Chuck well enough I could just go over and sit there, okay, but I would grab, I just loved doing this. I would grab someone who was so unknown and shy and would say to him, would you like to sit at Chuck's table? He would never. I said, come with me. I'd say, Chuck, this is my friend so-and-so. And we'd sit down, and the person didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say, but they'd tell me, I think that was about the happiest moment of my life. I said, it was mine too, because I was watching you and I saw how much it meant to you, so forth. So, you know what to do now, don't you? Bless people.